So imagine sleeping from place to place, never knowing where you're going to sleep next, never having a place to call home. That's what homeless people have to go through on a daily basis. Homelessness is defined as living in housing that is below the minimum standard or lacks secure tenure. Many refer to it as a wicked problem. And what is a wicked problem? A wicked problem is a problem that is difficult or impossible to solve because of incomplete, contradictory, and changing requirements that are often difficult to recognize. Factors for homelessness can include domestic violence, unemployment, medical illnesses, drug related problems, lack of money, and poverty. Homelessness impacts everyone in society because of their impact on communities and on the public cost. And especially with COVID-19, there has been an increase of unemployment, which can lead to homelessness. So what can we do about this? What are some ways we can solve an impossible problem? Well, for this project are two topics with food security and homelessness. And for this project, we spent a lot of time looking up credible sources that will help our approaches for this problem. Um, Kyra will be doing the background information, Hollis and Diego will do the approaches, Rachel will do the visioning, and Andy will do the action and conclusive statement. For the approaches, we will look at funding homeless programs and sheltering homeless people, especially during this hectic year. We will give you the benefits of these approaches and their pros and cons.
So what exactly is the problem with homelessness? Obviously, it's a problem, but how big is it? So in Fredericksburg in May of 2019, homelessness was up by about 1%, which doesn't seem like a lot, but when you're one of those about 25 to 30 families that are being forced into homelessness, it's a big deal. And homelessness was also up around the country. There are about 500,000 homeless people every day in America. And because of the COVID-19 pandemic, it's projected that there will be 250,000 new homeless people by the end of 2020. So what issues arise from being homeless besides having no stable housing? Well, as we move into the winter, it becomes more likely that homeless people will suffer from hypothermia and sickness. They're more likely to die from these situations as well due to lack of health care. This doesn't even account for the sometimes debilitating effects of COVID-19, which can be dangerous even for those with good health care and hospital access, which many people who are homeless do not have. Because, as Lewis said, they're often unemployed. So that means that they're probably not receiving healthcare, which makes doctor's visits far too expensive to go to the hospital if they need it, even if it's not for something like COVID-19. There's also an issue of food insecurity. This can be especially difficult for homeless families with children. So in the same May 2019 count, there were 25 total families with children that were homeless in Fredericksburg. This was a total of 60 homeless children. Many of those families rely on food banks or other free or low-cost food to feed everyone, especially their children who obviously are not capable of finding jobs, even if there were any available currently. So a lot of food banks and food pantries haven't had as many volunteers because people are scared to volunteer for fear of contracting or spreading COVID. And that makes it really, really hard to man everything, which makes it hard for these people to eat. It makes it harder for all the food to be stocked. If there's any way for meals to be prepared or delivered, this isn't happening because people are scared to volunteer. There's also the difficulties of social distancing and maintaining that, as well as decreasing contact as much as possible. So what are some of the solutions for homelessness?
Based on our research ample resources exist within this local community to effectively provide aid and potential new permanent shelter to the homeless community. Organizations like Mary's Shelter have demonstrated their ability to provide emergency assistance for large groups, as seen in their use of local host health space to house homeless community members during the COVID pandemic. The Rapid Rehousing Program has a short, it's a recent program, but effective history of helping families return to permanent housing. Existing programs like these have strong foundations and missions. Perhaps the biggest problem faced when addressing homelessness is not a lack of programs and community organizations, but rather a lack of widespread exposure these groups have, which limits funding and growth. Rarely is the issue of homelessness at the forefront of a community's mind, especially in the tumultuous world of 2020. In order to properly address the issue of homelessness in our community, it needs to be on the forefront of the public's mind, so proper effort and resources are being put towards it. Given the proper exposure within a community, these pre-existing programs would be able to be more effective within said community. Our first proposal is a website compiling information about all relevant organizations and how to support them that could be presented to the community in an easily accessible way, rather than relying on individuals to do excess research, which they probably won't do, in order to support the homeless community. This website would allow the community to access resources quickly and easily, which would provide positive exposure for the organizations. Links would be provided to make easy donations to any local organization, which would increase funding for those organizations from the community. If the website is effectively marketed, the community would be thoroughly aware of what resources are within reach and how they can support them. And the easy access of the website would potentially destigmatize homelessness and would better educate a community on why it exists and how individuals can contribute to ending it. This website should be presented to a sample group within the community to make sure it's easily usable. Now, there are some pros and cons to this solution. The pros would be that it is relatively inexpensive. Purchasing a website domain is not a large endeavor financially, and so it wouldn't cost the organizations a lot of money to do so. The exposure would be an easy victory that could have large, long-lasting positive effects. Donations would be easier to make and will most likely increase from their current amounts, so there's more money for these programs to carry out their mission. And lastly, it promotes an actively involved community. The community will now have an active impact on its own future rather than having outsiders step in and solve problems for them. The cons, however, would be that it does rely on the community. And depending on the interest a community has, this could be potentially unreliable. It also depends on the consent of all organizations and programs involved and some degree of coordination between them. If not everyone is on board or contributes as much as the other organizations, there could be a level of unreliability. Lastly, it doesn't directly solve the problem. However, instead, it builds a foundation to create future solutions, potentially many with varying effects.
So for our second possible solution, this will be including government assistance as well as government assistance in the form of state and local. Historically, one of the major contributors to homelessness is a lack of affordable housing mixed with little to no income. This year, Senators Mark Warner and Tim Kaine announced that Richmond and other localities across the Commonwealth of Virginia will be provided with $35 million in federal funding for affordable housing. This fund will be used to create safe and affordable housing, primarily for households with a higher chance of eviction. The federal government spends around $4.5 billion for affordable housing each year. Funding of this kind is essential in combating homelessness, People who are at risk of losing their homes to foreclosures or being evicted are supporting by these affordable housing programs with the hopes that they can bounce back from the situation that they're currently in. By most government standards, housing is considered affordable when rent or mortgage plus utilities is less than 35% of the household's annual income. This 30% cap is intended to ensure that families are able to pay for their other necessities such as food, healthcare, and transportation. So there are some pros and cons to federal and state assistance with affordable housing. Some of the pros include affordable housing programs positively affect the economy by increasing local purchasing power, job creation, and new tax revenues. If people are able to afford their requirements for their general living requirements, then they're able to spend money and stimulate the economy. But if they're unable to support themselves, then they can't spend money. They can't afford to spend extra money on anything. Um, it also increases the overall health of the local communities as more families are able to afford healthcare. Prevents homelessness altogether by providing adequate housing for families facing eviction. And some drawbacks to this, affordable housing programs are extremely expensive, as you saw before, $4.5 billion. I believe it was last year that the government spent on affordable housing programs. Families often have to be put on a waiting list in order to receive housing, and this waiting list is sometimes booked and takes sometimes years to receive that housing program. Most affordable housing projects are located in remote areas with little to no social infrastructure. A lot of these housing projects are located in rural areas or nowhere close to the city. There's lack of transportation assistance, and it's almost like a unintentional segregation because you have all of these low income families in one area and they're pretty far away from more opportunities.
The wicked problem of homelessness is one that many people face, but there isn't enough being done to combat this large problem, especially within the Fredericksburg community. The proposals set forth by Hollis and Diego are ones that are attainable and could be implemented within our community. The topic of exposure is one that will help the community understand the severity of the problem and understand different ways to address the problem, while being very easy to set up. Creating a website that includes the different statistics, resources, and different ways that members can support the problem will allow for an amplitude of possible solutions that are all achievable. Giving information about volunteering options or a place to make donations will make it easy for community members to give back and help decrease the amount of homelessness in the Fredericksburg area. Just by creating a website, this will allow for better and more positive results to occur just by the click of a button. Secondly, creating clubs within our school, UMW, will allow students to get involved not only within the school, but within the community as well. Having a plethora of different ideas from students of all different backgrounds will help create even more ideas and ways to combat the problem of homelessness. Secondly, affordable housing is an option that is seen in different areas of the country, with one being as close as Richmond, as Diego had previously stated. Having the option of affordable housing will allow people that may have little to no income a safe place to lay their head at night, which would mean that the number of homeless individuals in our area would start to decrease. It will not only decrease the number of homeless individuals, but will begin to increase purchasing power, job creation, and tax revenues, which will all help the community. It will require a lot of money to create these houses, but it will allow families to start spending less on housing and more on other basic needs such as food, water, and clothes for their families. This idea depends on a lot of outside factors, but would create extremely positive outcomes for the community as a whole. Creating a website, clubs, and considering affordable housing are all attainable solutions that will be extremely effective for our wicked problem of homelessness.
For our call to action, we just think people should be aware that homelessness is a problem we face at a national level, not just locally, and is something that can be somewhat fixed and helped with awareness and attention to the problem. Many governments have adopted affordable housing projects, which provide homeless people safe places to live, which decreases homelessness, especially in light of the COVID-19 pandemic, where we've seen an increase in both. Exposure to the problem and possible solutions, examples being websites, social media, and government awareness. Also things like GoFundMe and different petition pages that where people can directly contribute to help the homelessness cause. Governments creating emergency assistance programs in communities that allocate funding for programs that can assist homeless children fleeing bad situations. Many can take after cities such as Fredericksburg, who were able to help house people during the pandemic. Also increasing this exposure and awareness of organizations that can help people in bad situations. All can help to spread awareness of homelessness as a problem.